Tourists were everywhere that morning, filling the wide-open space in front of Buckingham Palace with excited voices, clicking cameras, and the sound of hurried footsteps. People from every corner of the world had gathered to see the place they had only watched on TV or read about in books. Some were seeing it for the first time, and others had dreamed of this moment for years. The bright red uniforms of the royal guards stood out proudly against the pale stone walls, and among them was Private Harrison, who stood as still as a statue with his tall bearskin hat and polished boots. Harrison had been a royal guard for several years, and he took great pride in his work. Even though he had to stand perfectly straight, never moving, never talking, he believed that his role held special meaning. He felt honored to protect one of the most famous landmarks in the world. People looked up to the guards with respect, or at least that was how it used to be. Lately, things had changed. Many visitors still respected the guards, but a growing number treated the area like a stage for silly behavior. They acted as though the guards were props rather than people doing an important job. Every day, Harrison watched different kinds of tourists walk past him. Some kept a polite distance, smiling quietly, admiring the uniform, and snapping a few photos before moving on. Others whispered to their children about how the guards were trained, teaching them to appreciate the tradition. But then there was the other group, the ones who caused trouble. They shouted loudly, ran too close, made funny poses beside him, or tried to make him laugh. Even though he could not react, he heard everything, felt everything, and saw everything from the corner of his eye. Standing still for hours was already challenging, but dealing with endless attempts to distract him made the job even harder. Harrison had learned to block out most of it. Still, he felt a wave of disappointment every time someone treated his duty like a joke. His uniform represented history and discipline, yet some people acted as if it were just a costume worn for entertainment. As the day went on, the crowd grew thicker. Tour guides raised their flags, calling out facts and stories about the palace. Children held ice creams, couples posed for photos, and phones rose into the air every few seconds. Harrison stayed in place, focused on the spot in front of him. But he could sense the movement around him, the shifting shadows, the footsteps behind him, the occasional person leaning in too closely. One group of teenagers walked past and giggled loudly. One of them waved his hands near Harrison's face, trying to draw a reaction. Another pretended to march beside him for a video. Harrison did not move, but inside he felt the familiar sinking feeling. He wondered why people thought this behavior was amusing. His job was not a street performance, yet some visitors treated it that way. A woman with a map approached next, stepping slightly closer than she should have. She meant no harm, but she was unaware of the proper distance. One of the guards stationed further down called out a gentle reminder for everyone to stay back, and she quickly apologized before returning to her tour group. Harrison wished all tourists would be that understanding. He admired the people who behaved with care because it made his duty feel respected and valued. Throughout the afternoon, more visitors arrived. Some tried to touch the palace gates, others held up long selfie sticks, and a few even crouched beside the guards for pictures. Harrison remained calm, reminding himself that patience was part of his training. He repeated the same thought in his mind: stay focused, stay steady, stay professional. He remembered the day he first put on the uniform. His family had come to see him during training, and his younger brother had looked at him with wide eyes, filled with admiration. Harrison had stood tall that day, knowing his work mattered. Now, whenever he felt frustrated by a disrespectful tourist, he thought of that moment. It helped him stay grounded and reminded him of his purpose. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature rose. Harrison could feel the warmth building under his heavy uniform, but he did not shift even slightly. The palace stood behind him like a silent guardian, and he stood before it with equal stillness. Horses trotted by from time to time, pulling ceremonial carriages or patrolling alongside officers. Their steady rhythm was one of the few soothing sounds in the busy environment. A group of school children soon approached, and their teacher asked them to form a line. They watched the guards with wide eyes, whispering questions to one another. One little girl waved shyly at Harrison, even though she knew he would not wave back. Her innocence made Harrison feel a soft warmth in his chest. Moments like that balanced out the careless actions from others. Unfortunately, right behind this polite group came another set of visitors who were less considerate. They talked loudly about trying to break the guard, as if it were a game. One of them made silly faces only inches away from Harrison's face, while his friends recorded the moment on their phones. Harrison stayed strong, maintaining a calm mind. He knew that reacting carelessly, even once, could lead to serious consequences. His discipline mattered more than anything. Hours passed, and the constant noise blended into a background hum. Harrison focused on his breathing, keeping his mind steady. He had spent years mastering self-control, and he relied on that training now more than ever. Behind him, the palace flag fluttered gently, reminding him of the responsibility he carried. Another tour group arrived, and the guide began explaining the rules clearly, reminding everyone to respect the guard's space. Harrison appreciated that. Not all visitors understood the expectations, but when guides helped spread awareness, it made his day easier. Still, despite the reminders, people continued to test boundaries. One man walked behind Harrison, whispering jokes to see if he would laugh. Another pretended to pose as a guard beside him. Harrison knew these actions were harmless in intention, but they showed a lack of understanding. He hoped someday more people would learn to appreciate the meaning behind the role. Yet even with the challenges, Harrison remained committed. He liked his job, and nothing could change that. He felt proud to represent a long tradition, something that connected the past to the present. He stood tall not just for himself, but for the history of the palace, the honor of his uniform, and the respect of the people who truly understood the importance of the guards. By late afternoon, the sky softened into a gentle glow, but the stream of visitors remained steady. Every new group brought different behaviors, some thoughtful, some careless. Harrison continued to watch with quiet patience, knowing that keeping order was part of his role, even if he could not speak or react. The day felt long, but he accepted every moment with calm determination. He knew he had chosen a job that came with challenges, and he was ready to face them with dignity. Even though some tourists behaved poorly, many others admired the guards deeply. Harrison chose to focus on those moments, the smiles of children, the respectful nods, the curious but polite questions from visitors who truly cared. He stood firm, steady as ever, prepared for whatever the next moment would bring. He did not know that the real test of the day was still ahead, waiting quietly among the crowd. But for now, he continued his duty, unaware that soon something unexpected would break the long routine of the afternoon. The late afternoon sun warmed the courtyard, and Private Harrison continued to stand tall at his post. The crowd around him moved like a steady river, flowing in and out, filled with voices, footsteps, laughter, and the occasional gasp from someone seeing the palace for the first time. Harrison remained still, listening without reacting. He had grown used to the changing rhythms of the day. But something about this particular afternoon felt slightly different. There was an unusual buzz in the air, the kind that often appears before something unexpected happens. A large group of tourists approached from the left side of the courtyard. They were energetic, talkative, and full of excitement. Some held cups of iced drinks, some carried shopping bags, and a few wore matching shirts as if they were traveling together on a special trip. Their cheerful voices echoing between the stone walls made the area feel even livelier. In the middle of this group was a man who stood out from the rest. He was louder, more animated, and seemed eager to entertain his friends. He talked with his hands, moved around constantly, and kept pointing at different things as if showing off his knowledge. His group laughed at everything he said, even when it wasn't particularly funny. Harrison could sense from the corner of his eye that this man had a playful personality, but perhaps too playful for the peaceful environment of the palace. The guide of the group tried to explain some facts about the guards, but the man barely listened. Instead, he kept nudging his friends and whispering comments that made them giggle. Harrison recognized the type from experience, someone who viewed the guards not as professionals, but as characters in a tourist attraction. He knew he should brace himself because this kind of visitor often tested boundaries without realizing the seriousness of the situation. As the group reached the front area where Harrison stood, the man walked ahead of everyone else. He slowed down, pretending to inspect Harrison closely, as if studying every detail of his uniform. Harrison did not move, but he could feel the man's presence getting a bit too close. The crowd around them watched quietly, sensing that something was about to unfold. The man lifted his phone and acted as if he were recording a show. He narrated in a dramatic voice, saying things about the guard who never moves and the challenge to make him react. His friends burst into laughter. Harrison kept his posture steady, focusing on a distant point instead of the people in front of him. He reminded himself that patience was part of his duty. The man circled around Harrison slowly, making exaggerated movements, pretending to tiptoe like a cartoon character. The crowd watched with mixed feelings, some amused, some uncomfortable. Harrison sensed the shift in the atmosphere. He wished the man would move on like most tourists did after taking a picture or two. Instead, the man stepped even closer, entering a space that visitors were not meant to cross. Harrison felt the slight change in air pressure near his arm as the man leaned toward him. The man waved his hand near Harrison's shoulder as if checking for a reaction, then stood in front of him with a dramatic pose. He smiled widely for his friends' cameras. Some people in the crowd frowned. A few whispered to one another, wondering why the man didn't understand the rules. Others held up their phones, prepared to record whatever they thought might happen next. Harrison could sense their eyes on the situation, but he kept his mind calm. He trusted his training and reminded himself not to react unless it was truly necessary. Then the man took things a little further. He leaned in and pretended to adjust Harrison's sleeve, even though he didn't actually touch it. The crowd gasped quietly, sensing that this behavior was inappropriate. A security officer nearby began making his way toward the area, but the man didn't notice. He was too busy trying to impress his friends. The man walked behind Harrison and made a silly face for a picture. Harrison remained as still as ever, but inside, he felt a familiar disappointment. He wondered why some people came all the way to such a beautiful place, only to treat it with such carelessness. The guards represented more than just a uniform. They represented tradition, discipline, and a long history. After a moment, the man stepped back into view, now facing Harrison again. He began speaking loudly, as if giving a performance for the people around him. He pretended to salute, then bowed, then made another dramatic gesture. Harrison stayed still, but the spectators could sense tension building. One of the man's friends suggested they take a picture pretending to stand side by side with Harrison. Instead of standing at a respectful distance, the man moved extremely close. He lifted his phone, stretched out his arm, and posed as if taking a fun selfie with a celebrity. The crowd's reaction grew louder. Some found it amusing, others clearly disapproved. The man grinned proudly, thinking he was being clever. He stepped even closer, leaning toward Harrison's hat. His friends encouraged him as they continued filming. The man reached out, not touching, but acting like he was about to adjust or examine the tall bearskin hat. His hand moved in slow motion, adding unnecessary drama to his gesture. Harrison felt the closeness. He knew the boundaries well, and he could sense that the man was just a breath away from crossing a line that should never be crossed. Still, he remained steady, hoping the man would stop on his own. The rules were clear. Visitors should never invade the guard's personal space, yet the man seemed unaware or uninterested in these guidelines. The atmosphere in the courtyard shifted again. The once lively noise softened, replaced by murmurs and whispers. People sensed that the man's behavior was becoming inappropriate. Some stepped backward, unsure of what might follow. A little boy standing nearby tugged on his mother's sleeve and asked why the man was bothering the guard. The mother gently explained that the guard was doing important work and should be treated with respect. Her words reached a few other people standing close, and they nodded quietly. The man, however, remained lost in his performance. He continued joking loudly, waving his arms and trying to make Harrison flinch. He seemed determined to get some kind of reaction for his video. His friends had their phones ready, thinking this would become a funny memory of their trip. A few people in the crowd called out softly, asking the man to step back and behave respectfully. He ignored them, still focused on making his group laugh. Harrison could hear the shifting tone of the crowd, and he felt the weight of many eyes on him. The man pretended to whisper into Harrison's ear, then stepped back and laughed loudly. His friends laughed along, even though their laughter sounded more uncomfortable now. His playful actions were becoming more intrusive, and the watchers sensed that he had gone too far. The security officer was now moving closer, but he hadn't reached the group yet. Harrison remained steady, hoping the situation would resolve peacefully. He had handled many difficult moments before, but this one felt different. The man's determination to seek attention was stronger than most he had encountered that week. Then the man made the gesture that changed the mood completely. He lifted his hand slowly, pretending as if he were about to touch the guard's tall hat. Even though he didn't actually make contact, the suggestion alone made the crowd inhale sharply. It became clear to everyone that the man was no longer just joking. He was crossing a boundary that should never be crossed. Harrison sensed this moment deeply. He remained steady, but he knew something significant was unfolding. The crowd grew silent. Even the man's friends stopped laughing for a moment, unsure of what would happen next. The man wiggled his fingers dramatically near the hat, thinking he was being playful. But the crowd could see the line he had crossed. It wasn't just silliness anymore. It was disrespect. Harrison held his posture with discipline, yet something inside him shifted. His training reminded him that he had the right to protect his space when someone got too close. He stayed still, but he understood clearly. This man had gone too far. What happened next would change the entire atmosphere of the courtyard and surprise everyone watching. The courtyard had fallen into a strange kind of quiet, almost as if the entire place was holding its breath. Even the usual chatter of tourists seemed to soften. Private Harrison stood as still as ever, but he could feel the quiet tightening around him like a rope gently pulling from every direction. He did not move, but inside, he knew the moment was becoming serious. The man in front of him had crossed a boundary that visitors were expected to respect, and everyone watching could sense it too. The man, however, didn't seem to notice the change at all. He wiggled his fingers playfully near the tall black hat, still smiling brightly as if he were doing something harmless. His friends stood a few steps back, their phones pointed toward him, but their laughter had faded. They now exchanged uncertain glances, as though they weren't sure whether they should continue recording or ask him to stop. A soft breeze floated through the courtyard, brushing against the flags and the leaves of nearby trees. The gentle sound made the moment feel even sharper in contrast. Harrison remained as steady as a statue, but his training alerted him that someone was too close, much closer than allowed. He reminded himself of the guidelines he had memorized long ago. Guards were expected to remain silent and still, but they were also trained to protect their space when visitors stepped beyond a safe distance. The crowd felt the tension. Some people whispered among themselves, wondering if the man knew he was behaving in a way that was not acceptable. A boy holding his mother's hand looked up at her with wide eyes, asking quietly why the man was doing that. She gave a soft sigh and shook her head. "Because he doesn't understand the rules," she whispered, her voice carrying to a few nearby people who nodded in agreement. The man continued performing as though nothing was wrong. He leaned forward again, pretending to speak into the guard's hat as if it were a microphone. A few giggles came from the back of the group he was with, but most of the crowd remained silent. His actions, once seen as silly or harmless, now appeared disrespectful and out of place. Harrison could hear the soft footsteps of an approaching security officer in the distance, but the officer had not yet reached the area. The man's playful act continued for another moment, his hand hovering far too close to the hat. The quiet around him was growing heavier, and even the man began to notice that fewer people were laughing. He paused, confused by the sudden change in the atmosphere. He looked at his friends, expecting encouragement, but their expressions were different now. They no longer looked amused. Instead, they seemed awkward, unsure, and uneasy. Some lowered their phones, questioning whether filming the moment was still a good idea. Still, the man seemed determined to get what he called the perfect reaction on camera. He shuffled his feet and tried again to pose in a way he thought would be funny. But this time, his movements were much closer than before, and he accidentally brushed the space near the guard's arm. He didn't touch Harrison, but the motion was close enough to make a few people gasp softly. That was the moment Harrison knew he needed to act. Not because he was upset, but because he had a duty to protect the area and maintain proper boundaries. His training had taught him to stay calm but assertive when someone entered his space in a way that wasn't appropriate. Without warning, the stillness broke. Harrison took one strong, sharp step forward. The sudden movement echoed through the courtyard like a snap in the air. His polished boots struck the ground firmly, creating a sound that startled nearly everyone nearby. People who had been standing casually moments before now straightened their backs and looked up with wide eyes. The man froze, his playful smile instantly replaced with surprise. His hands, which had been moving non-stop a moment ago, dropped slowly to his sides as he stared at the guard. He hadn't expected any movement at all, let alone something so sudden and forceful. Harrison's voice followed the movement, strong and clear. It wasn't loud in an angry way. It was loud in a firm, trained, professional way. His words were precise and steady, spoken with authority, but without any harmful language. "Step back from the guard," he said, in a controlled tone that carried across the courtyard. The crowd reacted instantly. A wave of surprise washed over everyone. Some people stepped backward, startled by the guard's sudden movement and clear instruction. Others held up their phones, capturing the moment, but now their expressions were serious, not amused. The man slowly backed away, his face a mixture of confusion and embarrassment. He looked around at the crowd, perhaps hoping someone would laugh again or treat the moment like part of a performance, but the crowd remained quiet. Even his friends looked uncomfortable, shifting their feet as if they weren't sure how to respond. For the first time that day, the man seemed to understand that his behavior hadn't been appropriate. His shoulders lowered slightly, and he lifted his hands in a small, almost apologetic gesture. He didn't say anything, but his expression said enough. He stepped back toward his group, no longer eager to be the center of attention. A few people in the crowd nodded quietly, appreciating the guard's calm but firm response. Others whispered to one another about how well the situation had been handled. Children who had been watching closely now looked at the guards with new respect, understanding that the stillness was not weakness, but discipline. The security officer finally reached the area, though by then the situation was already under control. He gave the man a gentle reminder about respecting the space and the role of the guards. The man nodded repeatedly, clearly embarrassed now. He shuffled away with his group, keeping a polite distance from the guards as they continued their walk. With the moment resolved, Harrison returned to his exact spot and resumed his perfectly still posture. To the outside eye, it looked as though nothing had happened at all. His face was calm, his eyes straight ahead. The only sign of the recent event was the quiet ripple of conversation passing through the crowd. People exchanged soft comments about how disciplined the guard had been. Some admired his patience, while others felt grateful to witness a moment that reminded them of the importance of respecting the guard's space. Within minutes, the energy of the courtyard shifted back to normal, but with a new sense of understanding. Tourists once again took pictures and admired the palace, but they kept a bit more distance now. Many seemed more thoughtful, watching the guards with respect rather than amusement. Even the children stayed closer to their parents, observing the guards with curious eyes instead of trying to distract them. Harrison remained steady, just as he always did. Even though the moment had required him to react, he quickly returned to his role. Inside, he felt a sense of calm return to him. He didn't feel upset, only relieved that the situation had been handled properly, safely, and with dignity. He knew the rest of the day would continue as usual. More tourists would come, more photos would be taken, and life around the palace would keep moving like it always did. But something about this moment stood out. It reminded everyone present that the guards were not just figures in uniforms. They were trained professionals with real responsibilities and a long tradition to uphold. For Harrison, the moment was simply part of the job. But for the crowd, it became a story they would never forget. For a few long moments after Private Harrison stepped forward and spoke, the courtyard felt different. It was as if the quiet stillness of the palace had gently settled over everyone, reminding them of where they were and what the guards represented. The crowd, which had been buzzing with laughter and chatter earlier, now stood more mindful, more aware of their surroundings. The man who had been causing all the trouble slowly backed away to rejoin his group. His confident smile from before had softened into something more humble. Even his friends, who had been laughing loudly earlier, now looked at him with uncertain expressions. Some of them shifted their phones awkwardly, lowering them as if unsure whether they should record anything anymore. The mood had changed. The playful energy had faded, replaced by a sense of quiet reflection. Harrison returned to his exact stance, standing tall and still, as if nothing unusual had occurred. Anyone who saw him for the first time would never guess that just moments earlier, he had stepped forward and spoken with such clarity. His calm posture reassured the crowd that everything was under control, and life around the palace could continue as usual. The security officer who had hurried over gave the man a few gentle reminders about respecting the area and the role of the guards. The man nodded repeatedly, clearly understanding now what he had done wrong. He didn't try to explain himself or act defensive. Instead, he quietly accepted the officer's words, knowing he had pushed the moment too far. As the officer walked back to his position, the man's friends gathered around him. One of them patted his shoulder in a comforting way, while another whispered something that made the man offer a small, embarrassed smile. It was clear that their excitement had shifted into something more thoughtful. Their earlier laughter now felt out of place, and they seemed unsure how to act next. Other visitors began whispering softly to one another. Some praised the guard's calmness. Others expressed sympathy for him, saying how difficult it must be to stay still while dealing with so many distractions. One older man, standing near the railings, shook his head gently and said to his wife, "People forget these guards are doing important work, not performing for entertainment." His wife nodded, adding that she admired their discipline. A group of teenagers nearby whispered among themselves, their eyes wide with surprise. They had never seen a guard move before, let alone speak so firmly. One of the girls said she now had even more respect for them. Another mentioned that she felt bad for the guard and hoped tourists would behave better from then on. As all these quiet conversations flowed through the courtyard, the atmosphere slowly returned to normal, but with a new layer of understanding. People became more careful about where they stood. They watched the guards with curiosity, but also with a sense of respect that hadn't been there earlier. Many kept a few extra steps of distance, making sure not to block the guard's path or come too close. Parents took this opportunity to gently explain to their children why the guard stayed still and why it was important not to disturb them. Children listened with big eyes, nodding seriously as if they were learning something important for the first time. A little girl asked her father if the guards ever got tired. The father smiled softly and told her that they were trained to stand for long periods, but that it was still important to respect them. Meanwhile, the man who had caused all the trouble stood quietly with his group. He avoided eye contact with the crowd, looking down at the ground instead. His friends spoke to him in low voices, not scolding him, but helping him understand why the moment had felt so uncomfortable for everyone. The man nodded, listening carefully, clearly feeling the weight of what had happened. After a minute or two, he took a deep breath and looked back at Harrison. Even though Harrison didn't react, the man's expression showed a sense of quiet apology. He knew the guard wouldn't acknowledge it, but the small gesture helped him feel a bit better about the situation. Gradually, the group decided to move along with their tour. They walked away quietly, in complete contrast to the noisy entrance they had made earlier. This time, they kept their cameras lowered and their voices soft. The moment had changed them, even if only in a small way. As they walked off, other tourists filled the space they left behind. People continued taking pictures, but they did so with more care. They admired the palace, the guards, and the detailed architecture with newfound appreciation. The incident had reminded them that they were visitors in a place full of history and tradition. A few people who had recorded the moment began watching the clips on their phones. They weren't laughing. Instead, they seemed fascinated by the rare sight of a guard breaking his stillness. A woman nearby commented that she hoped people wouldn't misuse the videos online. Another person agreed, saying it should serve as a reminder to treat the guards with kindness. Harrison, standing tall and steady, remained focused on his duty. He didn't think about the videos or the whispers around him. To him, the situation had already passed. His job was to protect the area, and now that everything was calm again, he simply returned to doing exactly that. Time moved forward. The crowd slowly regained its lively energy, though now it was more thoughtful. The sky above the palace shifted into a softer shade as the afternoon sun began to lean toward evening. The shadows grew longer across the courtyard, and the cool breeze carried away the last bits of tension from earlier. Several groups of visitors approached the guards with more respectful behavior now. One couple took a photo from a safe distance and whispered a quiet thank you, even though they knew Harrison couldn't respond. A school group walked past carefully, with their teacher reminding them to admire without disturbing. The children walked past the guards with wide eyes, treating the moment with a sense of wonder. Even the security officers seemed more relaxed. One of them exchanged a small nod with another officer across the courtyard, silently acknowledging that the earlier situation had been handled well. Their presence made the visitors feel even safer, knowing that there were people watching over the palace with care and professionalism. In the distance, the sound of footsteps signaled the approach of another group of guards preparing for rotation. The steady beat of their marching steps floated through the air, drawing attention. People turned to look, excited to witness the changing of positions. Harrison could hear the steps too, but he did not shift his stance until the exact moment he was required to move. His calm presence blended back into the familiar routine of the day. His brief step forward earlier had been a necessary part of his responsibility, but it did not distract him from the duty he carried with pride. As the routine continued, the moment slowly became a memory in the minds of the visitors. For some, it would become a lesson. For others, a story they would share with friends back home. And for many, it served as a quiet reminder that respect was essential, especially in places with meaningful history. Though the situation had lasted only a few minutes, it left a lasting impression. People walked through the courtyard with a softer attitude, a bit more humility, and a stronger understanding of the guard's role. The man who had crossed the boundary had learned an important lesson, and the crowd had witnessed something rare, a reminder that even the stillest people can act when needed. And through it all, Private Harrison stood where he had always stood, steady, calm, and dedicated, ready for whatever the next moment of the day would bring. The late afternoon sun stretched across the courtyard, turning the stone walls of the palace a soft golden color. The earlier tension had faded completely, leaving behind a calm that felt almost peaceful. People continued to walk, take pictures, and enjoy the beauty of the palace, but their voices were softer now, their steps more careful. The moment with the disrespectful tourist had become a quiet lesson for everyone who had seen it, and even those who arrived later could sense the respectful mood in the air. Private Harrison stood at his post once again, as steady as ever. Anyone passing by would think he had been still the entire day, perfectly calm, perfectly focused, perfectly committed to his duty. And that was exactly how he wanted it. The brief moment earlier, when he had stepped forward and spoken, was already behind him. It was simply part of his responsibility, not something he wished to think about any longer. His job was to stay present, to watch over the area, and to represent the long tradition of the royal guards with dignity. As more tourists arrived, they noticed the guards' steady presence. Many admired his discipline, standing quietly and taking pictures from a respectful distance. Some smiled softly, appreciating the calmness he brought to the space. They didn't know what had happened earlier, but they still sensed something about him, something strong, something honorable, and that made them treat him with care. A family walked by with two young children, who held hands as they looked up at Harrison with wide, curious eyes. Their father knelt down and whispered that the guards were highly trained, and that the stillness they showed was a sign of great dedication. The children nodded seriously, studying Harrison as if he were a hero from a story. Their admiration made a few nearby adults smile, as they too felt a gentle respect blooming in their hearts. Across the courtyard, a woman watched Harrison with a thoughtful expression. She had been there during the moment with the disrespectful tourist, and she had recorded a short video, not for entertainment, but because she found the guard's calm reaction impressive. As she replayed the clip, she realized how meaningful it was. The guard hadn't raised his voice harshly. He hadn't shown anger. His firm step and steady words had been peaceful, but powerful. She decided then that she wouldn't share the video in a way that mocked anyone or turned the moment into a spectacle. Instead, she wanted to post it with a simple message about respecting people who work in public spaces. She believed others might learn something from it too. She typed a thoughtful caption and uploaded it gently, never expecting what would happen next. Meanwhile, the man who had caused the trouble earlier walked quietly with his group toward the far side of the courtyard. His loud energy had faded, replaced by a more reflective mood. He looked around now with softer eyes, truly seeing the palace for the first time that day. The beauty of the grand gates, the calm presence of the guards, the steady rhythm of the courtyard, all of it felt different now. His friends weren't teasing him anymore. Instead, they spoke kindly, saying they understood he had just been trying to have fun, but reminding him that some places require more care. The man nodded, agreeing completely. He felt embarrassed, but he also felt grateful. The guard's response had been firm but not harsh, guiding him without making him feel attacked. It was a lesson he would carry with him long after he left the palace. Near the center of the courtyard, the sound of marching echoed softly. A new line of guards approached for rotation. Tourists shifted excitedly, eager to watch the precise movements and synchronized steps. Some raised their cameras, capturing the moment with respect. Others simply stood in admiration, letting the scene wash over them. Harrison kept his posture steady until the exact second he needed to move. When the moment came, he lifted his foot with smooth precision, stepping into the routine like clockwork. Every movement was practiced, sharp, and meaningful. For a few moments, the courtyard felt almost enchanted as the guards performed their careful rotation with disciplined grace. Tourists watched in awe, whispering to one another about how amazing the guards looked as they moved. The children clapped softly, even though their parents quickly reminded them to stay quiet. Everyone treated the moment with gentle appreciation, as if witnessing something rare and special. Once the rotation ended, Harrison moved back to his new position. The motion was brief, but it reminded the crowd once more of the deep respect the guards carried in their daily duties. His stillness returned, strong and unwavering, like a calm pillar in the middle of the busy courtyard. By this time, the sun was beginning to lower in the sky. Its warm light gave way to cooler tones, and long shadows stretched across the ground. Visitors lingered a little longer, enjoying the last bit of sunlight before evening approached. A few people approached the security officer to compliment the guard's professionalism earlier. The officer nodded with a kind smile, saying that the guards were well trained and always did their best to maintain peace. He didn't say much more, but his quiet pride was easy to see. As the minutes passed, more visitors began leaving the courtyard, heading back toward the streets outside the palace. Some carried souvenirs, others held maps, and many talked softly about their visit. Yet most of them mentioned the guard, his steadiness, his calmness, his dedication. The moment earlier, though brief, had become something meaningful to many. Across different countries, different time zones, different homes, the video uploaded by the woman began to spread. People who watched it didn't laugh or criticize. Instead, they expressed admiration for the guard's composed response and respect for the tradition he represented. Many commented that the guard had handled the moment with professionalism and dignity. Others said it was a reminder to treat all workers with kindness, no matter what their job looked like from the outside. Back at the palace, Harrison remained unaware of the online attention. To him, the day was simply another day of service. He didn't do his job for applause or recognition. He did it because it mattered, because it stood for something real and important, something bigger than any single moment. As evening slowly settled in, the warm glow of the palace lights illuminated the area. The courtyard grew quieter, but it still held the gentle presence of visitors who admired the beauty of the historic building. Harrison's shift would end soon, and another guard would take his place. Yet he stood just as strong as he had been in the morning, steady, disciplined, and focused. The earlier moment didn't distract him. Instead, it reminded him that even simple actions can carry meaning, that a single step forward, a single calm word, can shift a whole crowd's perspective. When the next group of guards arrived for the final rotation of the day, Harrison followed the routine with the same precision as always. Each step was measured, each movement exact. The sun set fully behind the palace, leaving the courtyard in soft evening light. As Harrison walked away to end his shift, his expression didn't change, but he felt a quiet sense of peace. He had fulfilled his duty, he had handled the situation with dignity, and he had helped remind everyone around him what respect looked like. Behind him, the crowd dispersed slowly, carrying the story with them. Some would share it with family. Some would remember it for years. Some would simply leave with a deeper appreciation for the guards and the responsibilities they carried. And through it all, the palace remained calm, standing tall in the heart of the city, watched over by guards like Harrison, steady, silent, and full of quiet strength.